welcome to today's chapter of Books and the World, a presentation of the Cape Cod Writers Center. I think you will be interested in this program today if you have ever flown from Cape Cod to anywhere, or even a round trip from Cape Cod to Cape Cod. Our guest is Howard Bonnington. Howard, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Who has not only compiled a book about history of flight on Cape Cod, but has done meticulous pen and ink drawings to illustrate his own book. The book is called, as you might guess from this introduction, Aviation on Cape Cod, expressed in pen and ink by our guest, Howard Bonnington. Howard, welcome to Books in the World.
I'm glad to be here.
The history of Cape Cod aviation is of great interest, obviously, to you. Tell me about how you were swept into it, got swept into it.
It happened relatively accidentally. The origin of the book actually, to start out the thought, has about 30 of my drawings. And not being a polished author, it does have descriptive material that relates to the drawings, but it's really not intended to be a reference manual. The material is a group of items that I've picked up by going on the internet or talking to various people involved in the aviation industry on the Cape. My interest in this particular project started back in around 5 years ago, when Bonnington Municipal Airport decided to build a new terminal. And it was widely published in the newspapers, and I saw it, and considering myself an artist, I thought it ought to have, or I ought to apply some of this interest to creating things that would be good to decorate the terminal as a kind of a sense of place. So being relatively new to the topic of delving into history, I right away seized upon the idea of the Wright brothers beginning basically the aviation in the United States, and I produced this drawing, which was based on on that well-known photograph.
On that famous photograph.
Yes.
And the plane, the Wright brothers, they called it the Flyer, or didn't they have a name for it?
I think
then?
they called it the Wright Flyer, yeah, and they produced after that a series of flyers, which I can mention a little bit later on. This one shows, the picture shows Orville flying, Wilbur at the wingtip guiding it, and they had a camera set up so that I think a local Coast Guardsman or a coastal worker would snap the picture if he saw the plane rise off the ground, and they did. So they produced this famous photograph. This, in showing this though at the airport, it didn't appeal so much because it didn't really relate to Cape Cod, or so it was thought.
No, this was done in North Carolina.
Right, that's a long way from Cape Cod. But with a little bit of help, I was told by a historian that there is was a man on Cape Cod, lived in Barnstable, who was a student of the Wrights. He was trained to fly by the Wright brothers in 1910. And his name was J. Clifford Turpin.
J. Turpin.
Right. And he learned to fly with the Wrights, and he flew in their exhibition teams for a year or so, and then he decided he would open up his own exhibition team. And he was in the process of giving up an exhibition in Seattle on a racetrack, because there were no airfields. Everything that was open could be used for flying. He was giving this demonstration, and a photographer, as he was about to take off, ran out into the middle of the track and tried to get a photograph of him. And Turpin, trying to avoid the photographer and not having sufficient airspeed, caught his wingtip on one of the stanchions of the grandstand, which spun him into the grandstand, and he injured about 16 people, and he killed a couple, and he badly injured himself.
Oh, gee.
So that he he recovered, and while he was in the process of recovery, his partner, who was continuing the exhibition flights, killed himself in another stunt that didn't work out very well.
Well, there was a great deal of tragedy with the fragility of the airplanes
That's
at
right.
that time.
That's right. And his plane must have been destroyed in the accident, but they had a comparable plane, and his partner kept flying it and killed himself. And then Turpin, hearing this, said, "I will never fly again."
Oh.
And he didn't. And he's been buried now since 1966, I believe, in Lothrop Hill Cemetery in the town of Barnstable.
Oh.
So knowing that, I thought, well, there is a Cape Cod connection right
All right.
away.
Now you have a picture of among your many pictures,
Yes.
and a drawing of the Wright Flyers Model B.
Yes.
We have that somewhere in our collection.
No, I don't have it with me.
All right,
but maybe
it's fairly similar to this, but it's a little more advanced that it has wheels instead of skids.
Yes.
And it was flown for exhibition in Harwich, I understand.
Yes, the Harwich Historical Society was nice enough to send. I inquired about this. That's another story. My wife read about a man by the name of Cahoon, who was an artist in Harwich, and in a book about him, it mentioned Old Home Week in Harwich, where they had an airplane flight. That's the only thing that showed in that book. But I called the Harwich Historical Society, and they were nice enough to research it and send me a newspaper clipping.
And you have it in your book.
It is
I found it fascinating, Howard. I'm going to read it.
Good.
It's a clipping, a copy of a piece of newspaper from Harwich. Old Home Week in Harwich. I quote, "All roads on Cape Cod led to Harwich Friday as the program for the concluding day of the town's 11th consecutive Old Home observance included airplane flights by Phillips Ward Page. It was the first exhibition of its kind on the Cape and drew more than 3,000 people to Don's Field in Harwich. As a strong wind was blowing from the bay, the flight was postponed until after the ball game of Harwich and Chatham teams." It kind of veers away from the airplane here.
Yes.
It says, "The resulting victory for Chatham by a score of 3-1.
Right.
The wind having moderated, the climax of the day was reached when the biplane slid gracefully over the ground and then soared high above the spectators. Page gave a 20-minute exhibition, and then after releasing 2 carrier pigeons, made an easy landing. After about 10 minutes, a second flight was made, quite as successful as the first. A concert and ball concluded the festivities. In the forenoon, sports were run off." So the airplane flight successfully twice
Yes.
shared the day with a ball game.
Yes, it did. And believe it or not, I went out to Harwich and tried to find out where Doane Field was, because the first impression was Doane Field must be an airport of some kind, but then realizing that for the first flight they wouldn't necessarily have built an airport. So then I concluded it was a baseball field.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, there were no airports per se in the early days. An open field was it.
That's true. And then it didn't say what kind of plane he was flying. So then I researched his name, and it turned out he was an employee. Well, he was trained also by the Wright brothers, but he was an employee of an airplane company in Massachusetts.
Oh.
And I keep forgetting the name of the airplane company. If you find it in there, you could help me out. But the thing was that this company was licensed by the Wrights to build their airplanes.
Oh.
And they had a series of airplanes that they built, and they went through a series of alphabet numbers, and they had an F-type airplane, whereas the Wright brothers at that time had a B-type. So I presumed he was flying
One
either
of the more advanced models.
Well, they were almost the same, you see. So it didn't matter. I drew the picture of a B-type because it was so much the same that it didn't matter. And it had been advanced from this, of course.
All right, now I'm going to jump a little bit in years. I'm going to jump from the Wright area and the Harwich flights
Right.
to 1931 for the Boardman-Polando flight.
Yes.
Two names that aren't too familiar today, but were very famous for a very good reason.
Right. Correct.
Now
I
you
won't-
have
I
a
won't
picture
say
among
right
your
anymore.
among your drawings here
Yes.
of a plane that was used by those two fellows, Boardman and Polando.
Oh, we've got it behind here, Bob.
Oh, right behind. Great.
Yeah, we take it
All
down.
right, we'll replace one with the other. Now this is a big advance from the Wright
Yes.
Brothers flyers, and it has a little indication of Cape Cod on it.
That's true. And it has the plane is named Cape Cod,
Cape
which
Cod.
is tough to see from the drawing. But this is a name that ought to be better known to Cape Codders because it's actually the subtitle of Barnstable Municipal Airport, which has been subtitled Boardman Polando Field.
All right, now who were Boardman and Polando?
Okay, Boardman and Polando were two Cape Codders. Boardman was a young flyer and interested in making a name for himself, and he lived on the Cape. His relatives some of his relatives still live on the Cape. But he conceived of the idea that he could get a prize, a monetary prize, for making the longest long-distance non-stop flight. And I don't know that it was a spectacular prize at the time, but he bought this airplane, which was a Bonnington J300, and it was designed and modified by Bonnington himself to be able to carry over 700 gallons of gasoline in the after part of the plane.
They had the gasoline inside the plane?
Yes, they had the gasoline in addition to the main tanks, which I don't know how much they held, but in addition to that, they had over 700 gallons in 5-gallon cans, which during the flight, and they made the flight, of course, during the flight they emptied the 5-gallon cans into the tank and then threw the cans overboard. So all along the route, there must be still some 5-gallon cans lying
Series
there.
of 5-gallon cans.
Right, and at the end, when they got to Istanbul, they had 5 gallons left.
Wow.
And the story that's told by Boardman's grandson is that they had to oil the engine continually, or for cooling purposes. And he developed. We got to get Polando on board first. Johnny Polando was a very lightweight person, but he was a terrific an airplane mechanic and a flyer. And Boardman enlisted him to be the co-pilot and partner in this adventure. And Johnny Polando rigged up this system where he could pump oil into the engine from the cockpit from a couple of oil drums, which they used as seats instead of regular seats. And the story is that the oil got so hot and the seats got so hot that they had to hold the cushions out the window during the flight to cool them off.
This is all very pioneer stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and the other thing was that he found that his pump didn't really work so well, because when they did get to Istanbul, of course. When they got there, he found that a lot of the oil he had pumped into the floor of the plane instead of into the engine. And
they were luckier than they thought.
Right, a few more hours. They were lauded by the Turkish people, and he called himself Ataturk at the time, the premier of Turkey. He met them. He feted them. He actually had 2 white suits made for them, because when they were flying, they had just the clothes on their back. So for these celebrations, he had these white suits made up, and he borrowed some shoes from people that were also white, that they could come to these celebrations and so forth. He gave them 2 medallions, which I had the pleasure of holding in my hand at one time. Which were made out of platinum and studded with diamonds and emeralds and so forth. They've been one of them that that Boardman had was appraised at a couple $100,000. During the course of the flight, the New York Times paid them $2,500 to drop copies of that present-day Times over the airfields at Heathrow in London and Orly in Paris. And I don't know what the name of the airfield is in Munich, but they've dropped 3 copies of the New York Times for a fee.
So they were advertising the Times as part of their adventure.
Right. And
whatever happened to Mr. Boardman and Mr. Polando?
Okay, Mr. Boardman was really an aggressive aviator, and he was in an air race a couple of years later and crashed on takeoff and died from the result. So he had a very short life. He's about 35 years old, I guess. Polando lived until he was about 83 years old, and he continued his flying on the Cape and was well known. In fact, when I was out in Chatham selling a book to one woman, she said that she flew with Johnny Polando. Of course, she didn't fly to Istanbul. But
and the Barnstable Hyannis Airport had a subtitle with those gentlemen's names on it.
Yes, in 1981 they had a celebration because it was the 50th anniversary of the flight.
Do you have, among your drawings, which are just magnificently done, a copy of the first aircraft to fly at Hyannis Airport?
I don't have it with me. I restrained myself. Of course, you know, I would have brought them all.
Well,
but then
we only have half an hour.
I know, we
program.
don't have much time. No, I don't have that with me, but that's another one. This is a Waco 9 that flew, first airplane to land at Barnstable Airport, which was then called Hyannis Airport. And it was a
What year would that be?
Beg pardon?
What year would that be?
1928.
28.
Right. And it was privately owned, and it was rumored that one of the stockholders was Amelia Earhart, though it can't be actually proven from what documentation there is, but there's always that rumor. So Amelia Earhart turns up on the Cape in that guise, and also she is alleged to have landed at the Grassfield Airport in Marston's Mills, and so it's like George Washington slept here. Amelia Earhart landed here. So I put a picture in the book, which is, I don't have it with me, is of Amelia Earhart's plane that she flew nonstop as the first woman to fly the Atlantic nonstop.
Mm-hmm. All right.
But the 2 people that came for the first flight came down from the I think from Denison area, and it was 2 people. There was a doctor and the pilot, and the pilot eventually became the manager at Hyannis Airport.
At the airport.
Right.
How many airfields are there in Cape Cod?
Well, I think I could name them, but well, first of all, we have Barnstable.
The big one.
The big one, yeah, the so-called regional airport. Then we have Cape Cod Airfield, which is the grass field, which is in Marston's Mills area. Mm-hmm. We've got Chatham Airport, which is a great place to visit, and they have I would call it a concession of some kind, or perhaps an ownership, called a stick and rudder. And I've showed 2 of the planes in the book that are based and owned by the stick and rudder. So they're
and there are other activities with fields, or not technically a field, but there was a seaplane base on Cape Cod during World War I.
Yes, North Chatham had a naval air station there. And the purpose of it was built in 1917 or so. Mm-hmm. It was abandoned in I have one of those. I'm sorry. And I drew this of the Chatham seaplane base.
This is kind of the base over here.
Yeah, and one of the flying boats leaving it, which is a whole other story. But the base is kind of an artist's conception, because I had very poor information. So I wanted, in this picture with the airplane, I wanted to have the base. setting aside that airplane, the base had flying boats there which were supposed to patrol the ocean against German submarines. And there was one story that during World War I, there was a submarines bombarding some tugboats and barges off of Orleans, and they must have called into the base and said, "Get the airplanes out here." And the airplanes came out. 2 airplanes left the base, came out with bombs, dropped the bombs on the submarine. The bombs didn't explode because of manufacturer's defects or something. So the submarine got away, and doesn't say whether the pilots threw hammers and wrenches down at them, but they had, it was anyway recorded as the first submarine attack in Atlantic waters during World War I.
And then after the war, whatever happened to the base? It's not there now.
The base has been demolished in 1922, and it's now a home sites, and I think there's a golf course out there. I think it's Nickerson Neck. I'm not sure about that, or that's what it's called.
So what had been a naval air seagoing flight base.
Yes, and it had balloons there too, or blimps they called them. This plane, you might not want to approach that subject yet, but this is a kind of a long topic. And this plane is one of 4 airplanes. They were called NC 1, 2, 3, and 4. And because of the NC business, they became known as Nancy's.
Oh, NC.
And they were built at the end of World War I, so they weren't usable for that purpose. But the Navy decided they could possibly fly them across the Atlantic and do the first Atlantic crossing, though not non-stop. They would fly from Newfoundland to Azores and then on from there. No. NC-1, they left Rockaway, Queens, off of Jamaica Bay in New York. The NC-1 flew, NC-2 never left Rockaway, NC-3 went on the trip, NC-4. NC-1 and 3 crashed at sea. The crews were rescued. The planes were lost, they were useless. NC-4 continued on to the Azores, and then to Spain, and then on to England. And it was then disassembled, taken back by boat to the U.S., and it's a product now, or I guess you'd say it belongs to the Smithsonian Institution, and it's now in the Pensacola Naval Air Museum.
Oh, so it still exists.
It exists, and I remember one lady telling me on the drawing, she said, "You didn't put any propellers on these." And I thought, oh my gosh. And then I thought, oh, they're spinning so fast you can't see them, right?
Well, of course. A name from your book, Howard Bonnington, Anne Smalley.
Yes.
Tell me about Anne Smalley.
Anne Smalley, as far as I know, was a young lady that was a graduate of the Brooks Academy in 1920 or so from Harwich. And when she graduated, she took up flying. I don't know who taught her to fly, but she flew a Jenny. That's an interesting. The Jenny was a plane that was built in World War II as a training plane for pilots. Had a maximum speed of 75 miles an hour.
Really speedy.
Real racer, right? And she flew that mail route from Cape Cod over to Martha's Vineyard and various places on the Cape. The Jenny has a place in history because the Postal Service created an airmail stamp in 1918 showing a Jenny to commemorate the start of the service. And the thing was...
Everyone, I have a very special reason I have to interrupt your interview at the last minute. We have a surprise for you, Bob. Howard, I have to tell you, this is Bob's birthday.
Aha!
Oh, my goodness.
You have been doing this for so long, and we just thought we would take a minute to celebrate. And
that's great.
We just have to interrupt this.
Well, thank you, Madeline.
But I have a great privilege. I'm participating in your birthday party.
Well,
It's really
thank
great.
you. This is Books and Birthday Cakes of the World
Books
here.
and birthday cakes. If you'd like to blow out the candles, I'll leave the set and you can
Oh.
thank Howard and we can have the cake after.
Well, now we only have a very short time left in our program today, and it might take me all of that time to blow out all those candles.
Give it a try.
Yeah,
All right,
I'll
I'll-
hold you.
Oh, take a deep breath.
All right. I think there's just
Did it.
one for every decade and one for good luck.
Thank
Well, we're going
you.
to leave that there. for now.
Thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Well, we have such a short time left, and I've used some of it to celebrate my birthday
That's
here.
really worthwhile, though.
But Howard, I want to really mention something else we haven't talked about
Yes.
today. Your artwork is meticulously done, and this is just background stuff, but the detail of the shoreline, this is Sandy Neck.
Yes, right.
Yeah, but the detail is superb. And there's a book toward the end of your book, a painting of yours, a drawing of yours, that shows a jet blue plane. We're jumping aviation models here.
Yes, okay.
And it shows a jet blue plane flying over Manhattan in
Right.
New York.
Right.
And the detail you have put into the land areas is just overwhelmingly beautifully done.
Well, you see, I was born in Brooklyn, and it's sort of like old home week to draw the city like that. I managed to get Central Park in there, and one person who saw this said, "I used to live on the Upper West Side on that street," and so
Yeah,
he
because
was
it's so
joking.
beautifully detailed.
Right. Well, it had
Now
to look
we're
like.
running out of time.
Oh, we're out of time.
Yeah, just about.
Oh.
I would recommend this book to anyone who has any scintilla of an interest in aviation. It's called, or do its title, Aviation on Cape Cod, expressed in pen and ink by our guest, Howard Bonnington. Howard, they're beautiful drawings. I really appreciate your coming in today. And if we had a program stretcher, we would go into detail on all the beautiful work you've done and the history you've put together with it. Thank you, Howard.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And we thank you for looking in on today's, well, sort of abbreviated because we don't have time to give all of the expression I wanted to Howard's book. Again, it's called Aviation on Cape Cod. Look for it in local bookstores. It'll be well worth your interest in aviation and in Cape Cod. And I thank you for looking in on today's episode of Books in the World, a presentation of the Cape Cod Writers Center. Thank you, Howard.
You're welcome.
I wish we had another couple of hours.
Well, I probably would keep talking then.